All right, in our last video, we went ahead and pasted a bunch of stuff into our CSS file. And if we come back over here now and we hit refresh to refresh the page, you'll notice one thing that happened is that sources no longer has that inspector style sheet because now it's actually all part of the existing styles style sheet right now. So if we were to expand some of this stuff and then take a peek, you could see that it did keep all of our styles that we just made. Okay. And one thing that you might want to do is come over to Komodo and clean up that file. You'll notice that some of the stuff that it did when Google Chrome Inspector is like this didn't get tabbed in, for instance. If we want to keep it consistent so that our tabbing looks right and everything, then we might want to just go ahead and get rid of some of the extra spaces. So we'll just take a second to clean some of this up. And there are a couple of other places where we might want to do that. And then here too. And looks like we've got one in the footer. Okay, so now our file is a little bit cleaner looking. Now, let's come back over here real quickly and let's take a peek at this. Everything is still sitting right up on the edge. And what we want to do is apply some margins. Let's start here in this content section and let's find actually the section whose ID is content right here. And then let's go over into the CSS and add a style. So I'm going to click right there. And before I add a margin, what I actually need to do first is I need to tell it how wide to be. Because we don't want this thing to be the full width of the page, or at least I don't. So what I need to do is first I need to tell it what the width is, and the width property is width. And I'm going to tell it in percentage. Let's try 90%. And the reason that I want it to be 90%, you see it cuts it off right there, is because then that way what I can do with a margin is I can center it. And then it doesn't take up the entire width of the page. It actually provides some visual hierarchy. All right. Now, you cannot set a margin and have it work properly with most block level elements, actually with any element, if the width is not specified. So it is important that we set the width first. We could have set the width in pixels or ems. The problem with setting it in pixels is that it will never reflow, it'll never change size. If I set it at 90, it'll always be 90% of whatever the browser dimension is. So let's do margin. And whenever I look at margin, this is a shorthand version. In fact, if you were to look at, let's just retype margin again, start to retype it, and you see that it pulls up all these other margin options, margin dash bottom, margin dash left, etc. Those are the longhand versions, but we're going to stick with shorthand because I think that it's useful for you to learn shorthand first because it's easier to understand it later. All right, so with margin, you can have different combinations. You can have 4 positions where you've got 4 different values separated by a space. And the way that that works would be if we wanted to say the top margin was 0, space, and then the right margin, because it goes in clockwise order, the right margin would be, we'll say automatic, okay? Auto means that it's automatically going to define itself, and then you'll notice that automatically it's doing exactly what we want it to do. Well, before I continue to type, what's happening is that it's applying the first position to top and bottom and the second position to left and right, and that's because it only has 2 positions. But if I went here and I continued to type, you see it gives me exactly the same margins. And that's because we have this clockwise orientation of 4 positions. 0 auto would be top, right, and then again 0 auto would be bottom and left, just like a clock. But because the top and bottom are the same and the left and right are the same, I can just do 0 auto for an abbreviated shorthand, okay, and then that works just fine. Now, you'll notice that the text is still sitting right up on the bitter edge. Well, one of the things that we have the advantage of is inside of here, inside of this content section, we have all these articles that are subsections. It might be nice for us to take these articles and bump those in. So if I select an article, you'll notice that just the generic article rule pops up. It doesn't have one right now for the specific IDs of about, goals, and miscellaneous, which is fine, because these all need to be the same. So what I'll do is I'll come and I'll click over here in my section content article rule, and I'm going to give this a margin of, let's say, 3%. And what it'll do is it'll actually, if I give it only one value, 3% like that, what it's going to do is it's going to create a margin all the way around. Now you'll notice that it didn't do a margin at the top, but what it is doing is it's providing some additional space at the bottom. So anyway, and you might be also wondering, well, hey, you didn't set the width on that. Why is that actually working? Well, it is working because what it's really doing is it's applying the margin then to the left and right, because it is assuming that it's 100%. Block level elements automatically want to take up 100% of their parent containers. And if the parent container has a defined width, which it does, because we just defined it at 90% of the entire browser, then now it does have some math to go based on. So we have if you don't fully understand that, you can back this up and listen to me talk about that again, but it's not the end of the world, so don't get tied up in that right now. But let's just say that we've got margin at 3%, and you'll notice what it does is that the A little bit about me and my interests, they're still sitting, all of this text is still sitting right up on the edge of the blue container, which is the article. And so you might be asking me, well, hey, aren't we trying to get rid of that? Well, what's happening is because we're setting the margin is sort of like an element's personal space, the way that we feel about the space that's around us. And so it's kind of like if you're standing next to another person, it's like having two elements next to each other, and you don't want to be close to that person, and you push that person away, right? You're still taking up the same amount of space inside your own element, but what you're doing is you're creating an additional margin, like this white area here is. You're creating additional margin by pushing that person away further from you. And that's kind of the way to think about a margin, is that a margin is outside of a person's space, or it's outside of an element space. And padding is what you want whenever you want to grow the interior of somebody's personal space, right? So like I might eat more cookies if I wanted to take up physically more space internally, right? So let's try padding. And then what we can do is we'll have padding all the way around, and let's just say maybe 5%. And then now you see that it bumps itself off the edges, because this part right here and this part right here and over here too, and also at the bottom now we have some padding. Okay, so that's something that looks a lot better, I think. And then don't worry about this white, we'll deal with this later, okay? What you're seeing right here with this white is that that's actually the content section that you're seeing, because now the articles have sort of pushed themselves off the border of its parent container and said, hey, I need about 3% of extra room on the sides, okay? All right, so that's a good way to get started with understanding the margins and padding for the content and article section. One of the other things that you'll notice is, like down here at the bottom, we've got a problem in our footer. There's not really enough space. I think that it needs more padding. So if we were to go over here, and we can actually just right click instead of having to search for it, and you see it jumps right down here. I can select my footer, and then I can add padding like this. And then let's do shorthand, and let's say top and bottom is 2%. Let's just try that. And then if I put a space, we can do left and right. I don't really want this this padding necessarily on the left and right now, and I'll explain why. Okay, even though you might go, hey, it's bumped right up on the edge. Well, the reason I don't want the padding is because I have an idea that I want to make this stuff centered. And so the next thing that I could do is I can, since everything that's inside of my footer is an inline element, meaning that it doesn't take up, you know, like the text itself. Okay, all right, let me back this up. Paragraph is a block level element, okay? But text, the actual text itself, like these anchor links and where it says copyright, my name, blah, 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 which I should actually fix, so that it actually says a name. That's actually inline. Anything that's actual text, even if it's inside of a p tag, the actual text is inline. And so if you want anything that's inline or inside of that paragraph to be centered, you can actually go all the way up to its parent if you want, and you could then say text dash align like this, oops, and colon, and then say center like that. And then you see what it does is that it actually centers everything. So I don't have to have side padding. If you wanted just to be safe to have side padding so that maybe if you get on a really small phone or something, it doesn't bump up on the edges, you could add the padding there. That would actually be okay. So that's actually probably not a bad idea. So where we have padding 2%, we could actually just say 2% and we could make it 2% all the way around. And that would give us an option so that whenever we're on something that's really narrow, that these things don't hit the edge, okay? And that'll work just fine. So now I've got everything centered down in my footer. Now what I want to do is look at my header. I want all of this stuff to be centered in the header as well. So let's take a look at how to do that. I'm just going to right click up here and inspect so that I can jump sort of up there. And what I want to do is select my banner because I want everything in the banner to be centered. So if I go up there, I can go into my style sheets over here on the right, and I can say text align like this. Whoops, I lost it. Let's try that again. Text align colon, and then we'll say center. And then you see everything gets centered, including this picture, because images are also inline elements. Now you might look at this list and go, wait a second, it's a little bit off center, and that's really annoying. It is really annoying. And so one of the things that we can take care of, first of all, we've got these bullets, and then you'll see that there's also an additional problem where the unordered list has additional padding. So like if we were to go down here, let me show you what I'm talking about, and we jump into the nav area. If I select or if I hover over this UL, you'll see over where the bullets are off to the left, you'll notice that it kind of turns like a greenish color, whereas the actual list items themselves here are blue. The UL adds this additional padding in the user agent style sheet, and that's what's happened. If you look over to the right, that's what's happening over here, is it's adding some padding on the beginning, right? It's adding a 40 pixel padding. All right, so there's some things that we need to do to get rid of that. So I'm going to right click, actually I'm just going to select the UL, and one of the things that you'll notice over here on the UL is that I don't actually have any predefined lists, or excuse me, predefined styles that are already in my style sheet. So before I start creating new stuff that are going to end up in a fake inspector style sheet, I think what I'll do is I'll jump over here to sources, and right now, just while I've got my regular styles.css changes made, I'm going to do that select all again. I'm going to copy it, and I'm jumping back into Komodo. I'm going to select all, paste, and then now I'm going to save it so that at least the changes I've made so far are updated. And if I come back over here and I hit refresh, okay, now I know that at least all of those changes that I've made so far with the centering and the padding and stuff, those are all changed and updated, okay? And I think we could jump back over here and we can find our list, but I think that at this time it probably makes sense to go ahead and stop this video, and in the very next one we'll address some of this stuff that's up here with the list and then also with this image up here, so it's not so gigantic.